Hello, my name is Owen, and welcome to a unique video, a think piece, if you will, of why do people hate popular books. Just to be clear, just to be honest with you guys, I've said this on the channel before, one of my pet peeves about BookTube, and this is kind of a hot take, not everybody agrees with me, hate reviews, I hate. I find very, very little value in hating hate books videos. And I've said in the past, because if a creator I respect hates a book, I'll take their word for it. I'm not going to read it. All right. You could stop there to say, hey, I wouldn't recommend this one. And then on the flip side of that, I just find them to be wrong most of the time or disingenuous. A majority of them are very disingenuous, and we'll get into that a little bit. But I just want to make this video. I think it's an interesting, nuanced topic, and I just want to say at the very beginning of this video, just before you start typing away and start arguing with me, there's a difference between hating a book and criticizing a book. There's a difference between that, right? You could read a bad book and still not hate it. Okay? Just making that clear, and then we're going to get into the topic. And now, also before we get into the nitty-gritty, on a macro sense, I know exactly why there's so many hate videos out there. It's a social media phenomenon. It makes money. Hate content, rage bait, clickbait, stuff like that. It's the bread and butter of social media. It's the bread and butter of social media creators, right? That's the macro reason why this trend exists. However, these types of videos are made by people who genuinely do hate these kind of books and would go around in the real world saying they hate these things. And they convince a lot of people to hate these books and kind of adopt this hateful mindset towards a lot of books. And we're not talking about like actual incomprehensible writing. And I know you may think these popular books are that. They're not. Actual incomprehensible writing where it does not know story structure and cannot form a coherent story. Those books do not get read by anybody. They do not become popular. As much as you think the most popular book, best-selling, it's like, oh, absolute trash, unreadable. It's not unreadable because a lot of people have read it. It wouldn't have made it that far if it was incomprehensible. Yeah, do they run the grooves of tropes and very common story structures? Very deeply, very deeply. So much so that you probably read the first 10 pages and predict the rest of the book? Yes. That is part of the reason why they're popular. However, it does follow that structure. Actual bad writing does not get published, does not get read by anybody, even you. You do not read actual trash writing, okay? So put that aside. These popular books are not not writing, despite people sometimes saying that. They are writing. They might just be a little bit more well-worn. It might have some flaws that you can't overlook, but we'll get into that. Now, first of all, what triggered this video for me, specifically about BookTube, about hate reviews and stuff like that? As you know, I've been reading a lot of these very popular bestsellers for a couple reasons. The first being I kind of want to see what they're all about. And probably the bigger one is a lot of people in real life that I run into who maybe aren't like the biggest readers, or maybe even they are, I see them in the real world, they're reading these kinds of books. So on a human-to-human level, in my real life, instead of just looking at a phone, me talking to real life people, these are the books that we talk about. So I enjoy that aspect of the socialization in real life, and I want to see what they're about. And for the most part, I read the ACOTAR trilogy, I read Fourth Wing, I read a couple romance books, I kind of read a couple Barnes & Noble Book of the Months. For the most part, I had a good time. There's a lot of criticism about these books. I had a lot of criticism about these books, but I had a good time overall. And after reading these books, I do peruse the BookTube a little bit to see what people are saying. A lot of people like them. Obviously, it's a very popular book. But then you come across videos. And I think this one, the one in particular I'm thinking of, don't know the creator's name, never heard of him before. He was reading Fourth Wing, or had read Fourth Wing. And basically, the hate review was him recounting the plot sarcastically. And now you may think I'm just like over-exaggerating to prove a point. Literally, that was the entire video. He went step by step, essentially scene by scene, recounting what happened and just giving like the Jim like from The Office, right? Giving like a sarcastic look at the camera like, really? And that was the entire video. And I'm like, wow, what a crappy creator. I watched probably 3 more. Some of them were a little bit better. Some of them actually provided like meaningful feedback, but it came from such a hateful place. And the majority of the criticism of all of these videos is just recounting the plot sarcastically. And they say sarcasm is the lowest form of wit. Sure it is, buddy. Sure it is. I like sarcasm much than the next guy, but you know what? I see where they're coming from in these ones, because it filled me with rage. You hate the book, I hate you. We are not the same. We are not the same. But just like literally, they would just like, and you could do this for any book, and that's the thing that infuriates me the most. Like, it's these people who read a lot of books and they think that gives them an elevated sense of judgment, that they could cast their judgment down upon others, but they don't realize that you're providing no value to society. You take your favorite book, Lord of the Rings, right? That's a real fantasy, not this ACOTAR junk. Lord of the Rings is real fantasy. So there's the most powerful wizard, and there's the guy who's going to be king, but they give the ring to the Hobbit. Makes sense. Makes sense. Because his uncle had the ring previous. Makes sense. Yeah, makes a lot of sense, Tolkien. Makes a lot of sense. You see how easy it is? Oh yeah, and then Gollum falls in the volcano. He just jumps right into a volcano. Sure he does. What a convenient way to end the story. What a convenient way. He just jumps into lava. Makes a lot of sense. And it's that for the entirety of the book. What is wrong with you? It's no commentary. It's just, and you know what? And people eat that stuff up, quite frankly, and it's disgusting. People in the comments are like, oh, this book sounds horrible. Sounds horrible. They haven't read it. But it's so easy to make somebody cynical that hasn't read this book, and it creates this predisposition for a lot of people, especially if you're in a specific like niche of BookTube, to hate these books. And I perfectly understand the psychology of how this happens, specifically with a series like ACOTAR or Fourth Wing, where it's fantasy romance, right? And I think like on a base level, a lot of these niches are people who read a lot of fantasy, right? They're people like me where they read Malazan, and I probably read 20,000 pages of Malazan alone. I'm doing a reread of a 1,500 page book, and I'm like a psychopath who puts thousands of sticky notes in it. It's people like me that are reading this book, and trust me, I know this because I've been there. But like romance is generally seen as a more trivial genre. And I think that's a valid thing to say, because any rom-com you watch, any like fun romance book you read, it's the same arc, right? It's the meet, the fall in love, the breakup, they get back together. There's some books or some movies that kind of like put a spin on that. They change the ending, make it a little bit fresh. But that's the general framework of the majority of these. And the reason that this hasn't changed for decades is that people enjoy it. And you watch a rom-com, I'm a fan of the rom-com, even though like they generally follow the same pattern. It's like the covering on it, which makes each one unique, right? It's this one's in New York, this one's in Antarctica, this one, they were exes. It's that. It's like the filter over this structure, but it's a well-worn structure. A lot of times you know where it's going to go, but you're just in it for the ride. You're in it for pure entertainment value, which is another thing that people have trouble separating. Those that consider themselves elevated readers, they can't separate like literature to like change your life view versus like entertainment. They forget that a lot of books are just for pure entertainment value. If you can't separate that in your head, it's a you problem, not a me problem. But this very tight structured romance genre, and then you put it into fantasy, which fantasy is almost the complete opposite of romance, where there's not, especially in modern fantasy, there's not as much of a rigid structure. Like it used to be, it's just like the pure hero's journey, right? An outsider is the chosen one, he gets powered up and he wins. A lot of, you could say that framework still applies to the majority of fantasy, but in the broadest sense possible, fantasy is anything because it's all made up, from the name of the sky to the color of the grass, right? Versus romance, where everything's kind of predetermined. So I think a lot of fantasy fans, diehard fantasy fans, They hear the idea of putting this very rigid, structured genre into this wide, it could be anything you want, and they think, well, you just butchered it. You took away the best thing about fantasy was that it could be anything we wanted, and you put a structure on it where we're gonna know it's gonna be to serve the romance. So everything's gonna serve the romance, and you don't like it, blah, 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 blah. So you're predisposition to hate it, especially when you're one of your creators just sarcastically reading the plot. And like I said, criticism is not the same as hating something, because something we need to remember, guys, the opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy. So my advice to you, and this is what I think we should do as a society, outside of books, outside of social media, we need to change the way that we approach things just in general with life, because, and how do I want to say this? So when I approach a book, let's just go back to ACOTAR, right? Is it the greatest book of all time? No. I think the third book is actually more bad than it is even mediocre. But the mindset we have to go in, especially if we consider ourselves elevated readers, like I would consider myself an elevated reader, just like the rest of you, right? I read a lot of books, I read a lot of stories, I know how they should go, I know what makes them good and what makes them bad. But going into these stories with a sense of condensation, condescension. What? How do you, you're condescending? But the word that's longer than that, I'm an elevated reader, guys. Not an elevated speaker. There's a difference, okay? But you go into these books, and in my thing, it's like, well, I want to see what these books are about. But my mindset is, I want to see what people like about these books. Right? And it's a different mindset. It's a more optimistic mindset than I'm going to see because a lot of people read books, which I don't understand either. It's like and there's been times where I'm reading a book and it's like every decision the author is making infuriates me. You roll your eyes like that was dumb. But in that case, instead of letting yourself just be hate reading something, you're allowed to put it down, my man. You're allowed to put it down. You don't have to read it. First of all, which I think is the healthier option. But if you're gonna read it, it's more fun, trust me, it's way more fun, it's way more healthy for you if you just look at it from a literary critical analysis point of view. And if you're gonna be making a video about it, you're gonna be speaking to your friends about it, have a reason for your dislike, for your disagreements with the author. But if you're going into the book thinking about why people like it, first of all, you'll enjoy it more. And in that way, because you have a more optimistic mindset, when something that you don't like happens, you're able to articulate what is it specifically about that moment, that character, that plot event that you didn't like. For example, when reading ACOTAR, the third book, I had a lot of criticisms with that book. Instead of just saying something like, oh, and then they introduce, in the final book of the trilogy, a magic powder that takes away your powers, and then they cure it 100 pages later, not even at the end, not even in the end of the second act. They introduce something that raises the stakes, and then they just instantly get rid of it. If I stop there, you'll agree with me, that's pretty stupid, right? And I just kind of said it like it sucked, which it did suck, by the way. Instead of saying that, what if we said something like, that takes away, the reason that doesn't work is you're introducing purely to raise the stakes, and by taking it away, you give me, the reader, the sense that nothing really matters because you can just make up the world building as you go along, which takes the stakes out of the entire book, not just the magical thing, right? And that's something that happens multiple times in that third book in the trilogy. Something dramatic will happen, and the author introduces a bit of world building, a little bit of rules of the magic system that instantly nullifies the stakes there. And it gives us the feeling that the author does not have a pre-created world. It's railroad tracks putting the tracks in front of each other, and which means that the author can do whatever she wants, and it kind of takes us out of the world and makes us remember that we're reading a book, right? And I really didn't say that much of a different thing than the first time, but the fact that it's you think about what makes you mad about it, why does it make you mad? Just a little bit more, guys. And I could say those things and still not hate the book, right? I think that book is the worst one of the trilogy, And it's mostly because I was bored and I would have rather been reading something else. Not because I hate it, not because everyone I think enjoys it is a piece of trash, because I was looking for the best things. And then when I found the worst things, I was able to look for the reason, for the impetus. And I would go as far as saying, as people who read a lot, which a lot of people that watch these kind of videos or that make these kind of videos do, we almost have a responsibility to use our story knowledge, the fact that we can say why we don't like something that we don't like is a skill, and it's a skill that comes with a lot of reading. We have the responsibility to use that skill to provide this criticism, to make these books better, and to get people that we care about in the real world who maybe don't read as much to read better books, or books that we enjoy more. Because when are people going to realize that if you're trying to convince someone of something that you believe they don't believe, only criticizing them and telling them their taste is trash, this book is trash, is not the most effective way to do that. And some people will just refuse that. They're like, I don't care. I don't care what other people think. I'm just going to throw my opinion down from the stars and everyone's a sheep and I'm the lion. But if you have like your girlfriend, your best friend, your brother, your sister, if they're reading books that you consider like not that good and they're like, this is the best book ever, no book is better than this, and you know you just haven't read it, you've read 5 books in your life, that's why you think it's the best, which happens a lot of the case, read the book with them, find out what's good about those books, because books do not sell millions of copies without any redeeming qualities, guys. And maybe the reason they like those books so much is because this well-worn trope that you know so well, they've never read before. And people say it so many times that it's kind of like that people ignore it because you hear it so many times, but people read so much more. People start getting to reading and stuff like that because of these $1 million copy books, not because of your Malazan. No one's first book is this series. No one's. And they wouldn't like it if it was. You got to find the middle ground with these people, find what they enjoy, and then present your criticisms in a way that builds upon instead of tears down, if that makes sense. And in general, I don't even like books that really, or reviews that really just like only criticize a book in general. But I feel like it's more acceptable if it's constructive criticism, if it's coming from a place of this story structure is like impeding me as a reader for a specific reason, like I was saying, like the ACOTAR example. But just coming from a cynical place, I think it's just horrible, and it just makes me upset. It fills me with rage, right? Stop being so cynical, guys, is what I'm trying to say. And maybe we'll all read together the greatest book in the world, which would be fill in the blank. I couldn't think of a good example that would be a universal greatest book in the world because a lot of my favorite books, very controversial. Not in terms of their content, just in terms of a lot of people just don't like them. Like The Stand, a lot of people do not like that book. They do not like how it ends. I perfectly understand why. However, nary I say, nary a thought. I think it's a perfect book, is what I'm trying to say. But anyway, I digress. Just be happy, guys. Books can be good and books can be bad, but you don't gotta hate anything. Because reading is a fun hobby, and let's keep it fun. Be sure to like, subscribe if you like the video, you want to see more like it in the future, and as always, thanks for sticking around.